Angelicus and its Spurbs.
Well, welcome to Spurbs Herbs episode 56. Today we are going to be talking about a very interesting herb and spice, a delicious spice called sumac, very Middle Eastern, but we're going to find out not just Middle Eastern. And the actual name for this herb, the botanical name for this is Rhus coriaria. So we're going to get into all of that on today's episode. So without further ado, let's get into things. So today we'll be looking at another world herb, sumac. This is a delicious Middle Eastern and African spice, but does it have medicinal properties? Spoiler alert, it does have medicinal properties, and we're going to explore them with our usual thoroughness. Join us as we look at this spice, herb, medicine, as well as usual, exploring something a little different. In this case, the very important Book of Changes. So something a little bit different for us. It's going to be another interesting and, dare I say, terrific episode. Before we get into today's episode, I did want to, you guys are my audience. I love you guys. Thank you very much for listening. But I wanted to give you guys a heads up. I'm starting a webinar series and wanted to let my podcast listeners know about it before anyone else. It's going to be starting in September of 2023 and continuing for quite a while. It is called Integrated Nutrition in Chinese Medicine, and will cover biomedical and Chinese concepts of nutrition and explore the complementary and alternative concepts that are part of the modern supplement industry. The series will be one live class per month covering a category of nutrition and will include some basic biochemistry, nutrition, and supplements available on the market. In other words, it's going to be the perfect combination of biochemical nutrition, supplements, Chinese medicine, and real-world use cases. Why would you use these particular supplements or not? We're going to talk about that in this series. If you're a practitioner of any stripe or just interested in nutrition, this is the series for you. And you can sign up for the first class or the whole series at www.integrativemedicinecouncil.org. That's integrativemedicinecouncil, COUNCIL.org. As you can tell, integrative is kind of woven through a lot of what I do here. So I will only be teaching each class live one time. After that, it will only be available as a recording, so you can be part of it. You can be part of it live. So don't miss this opportunity to learn about a topic all our patients ask about and get a firm understanding of the basics of integrative nutrition. And I'm going to put it out there. I'm a traditionalist when it comes to nutrition. I'm not going to give you way far out stuff on nutrition. You know, take megadoses of this or megadoses of that, and you're going to be able to cure everything that ever ails you. I'm not that way at all. It's science. We're going to be talking about the science of this stuff. So it's going to be really interesting. So yeah, thank you. Okay, so without further ado, let's talk about today's something a little different. So here is, we're going to talk about the Yi Jing, or the Book of Changes, and we're going to get into it. But I kind of wanted to tell you why I decided on that this episode. Because I had a major life decision. And when I've had major life decisions, I have often consulted the Yi Jing. The Yi Jing is a book of, it's considered an oracle. And I don't want to say an oracle is thought of as predicting the future. That isn't how it was ever explained to me, but it was more like you ask it a question and it gives you something to ponder about, and it may give you some direction. So for example, when I was going to medical school, when I had gotten into Australia medical school. I was very concerned about being able to come back and practice medicine if I did an overseas school. Of course, if you're going to go overseas, Australia is definitely one of the better places to go to medical school overseas. But I was worried about it. I was really worried about it. Surprisingly enough, it didn't matter because I ended up not doing my residency because I had a spinal cord tumor in medical school. But it was very interesting. I cast the Yi Jing. And it was really interesting what it said to me. And usually it's nowhere near this clear. But I said, I don't remember the exact question. I know I have it written down somewhere. But it was something like, would going to medical school in Australia be appropriate or a good thing or whatever it was, something along those lines, probably much better form than that. And it came back and it actually said, again, amazingly, it said, crossing the great water furthers. It was like as clear as bell that that is what I should be doing. So I'm on the cusp of another sort of major life decision, maybe changing directions a little bit. And so I tossed the Yi Jing recently, and that's why the Yi Jing was on top of my mind as I was going into this Spurbs Herbs episode. And I said, this is a really important book. It is a foundational text in Chinese thought. It's not a Chinese medical book, but it is used in Chinese medicine, which we're going to talk about in just a minute. So I thought, when I've taught Chinese history in the past, this of course is one of the three big books that we talk about. Really, really foundational, really important. So we're going to get into it a little bit and talk about it. So again, it's called Yi Jing, and it's often translated as the Book of Changes. Now, Jing is a little bit more than just a book, and is often translated as a classic. It's a book that has withstood the winds of time and all that. So it's an important book. It's not just a book. It's a classic. So sometimes you might see the classic of changes, but that's usually not how it's translated. It's usually translated as Book of Changes, but it really is more than just a book. So then changes in this case is Yi, is the Chinese. And when you look at the character for Yi, it's actually a picture of a chameleon which changes color easily. And that makes sense, doesn't it? Changes, and so that's how it's translated. And that's a lot of the early pictograms would be along those lines. They're from the natural world or what have you. Currently, the modern word for lizard is Shi Yi, so it still kind of contains that Yi aspect in it. So, original material was written on bone fragments by shamans, and there's a question mark around this because this is very old. The original materials predate writing, and so we're not entirely sure, but we've gotten scraps and we've gotten things that we think are the beginnings of the Book of Changes. Another one that is thought to be true, but there's a question mark, is turtle shells are heated in fires and the pattern of cracks are used for divination. Of course, these aren't used today, but originally that may have been the case. Again, imprecise date of origination. Legendary ruler Fuxi listened to the 8 winds, and thus inspired, he set down the 8 basic signs. And he saw the 8 trigrams on the back of a turtle. So a very common depiction of this historically is 8 trigrams on a turtle. Now, what is a trigram? We're going to talk about that in just a minute. Westerners first encountered this text through missionaries who went to China, and it was considered quite, non-Christian at that point. Very interesting. There's a lot of interesting history with that, but we're not going to get into that right now. Yi Jing is based on primitive and prehistoric culture and includes aspects of necromancy, which is defined as the practice of communicating with the dead, especially in order to predict the future. Geomancy, the art of placing or arranging buildings or other sites auspiciously. If you're familiar with feng shui at all, which is geomancy, is the placement of things. They use the trigrams. The 8 trigrams are primary in that, and so very much kind of carries over. It goes back and forth. Like you could say feng shui is based on this, and you can also say that that feng shui influences this as well. Divination from configurations seen in a handful of earth thrown on the ground or by interpreting lines or textures on the ground, part of geomancy. That's another definition of geomancy. Also, aspects of numerology, the branch of knowledge that deals with the occult significance of numbers. And occult here is defined as supernatural, mystical, or magical beliefs, practices, or phenomena. And then finally, just word magic. Just the words themselves have magical properties. Now, do I believe in the magic of any of this stuff? No. My teacher was very practical about this stuff, and he basically said, this is just, casting the Yi Jing, asking a question and casting the Yi Jing, which, again, we're going to talk about it briefly, is more about directing your thoughts and having questions come to you that you might not have otherwise pondered, or maybe not in a formalized way. So his thing, and my teacher was Taoist, but he was Christian as well. So there's no conflict in his mind at all between these two things. And so He kind of thought of it as more of a book of wisdom. And there's sort of an element of the universe in the chances of what you will pull out of the book and what have you. So, not, there's mystical aspects, but not like, anything too much in his interpretation. And I kind of tend to be that way as well, as sort of a grounded sort of person. So the basic building blocks of the Book of Changes, the Yi Jing, and what we have here is the most basic is yin and yang. And of course, as if you're at all familiar with Chinese medicine, you're pretty familiar. You should be very familiar with yin and yang. And yin and yang are the basic opposites. And so we have some things that are attributed to yin and yang. They're constantly transforming into one another. There's a regeneration and a degeneration, so they wax and wane with each other. And in the case of the Book of Changes, yin is symbolized by a broken line, yang is symbolized by a solid line. That's all there is. You have a broken line or a solid line, and then that's yin and yang. And that's the basis of this. Now, on my slide, and not all of you can see my slide here, I have a pictograph on a picture on the right. And on the top of this is an empty circle. And this represents the absolute, or the Wu Ji. And so there's nothingness basically. And then below is another circle that has, it's kind of, it seems like it's split in half with, and then in 3 inner circles within this. And on one half of that is white and the other half is black, and they alternate. A little bit hard to explain, but that's what it is. And this represents the Tai Chi. You're familiar with the Tai Chi. That's translated as the great ultimate. And usually we think of that as the yin yang symbol. It's like some people say fishtails or what have you. That's technically called the Tai Chi symbol, not the yin yang symbol, or the great ultimate symbol. And this is another version of that. So not quite as the same, but in the same ballpark, and probably an older version of that Tai Chi symbol. And it represents the harboring, the two, or yin and yang, shown as 2 semicircles that mirror each other. Each semicircle is made of black yin and white yang lines that enclose each other to depict yin containing true yang and yang containing true yin. So the empty circle within these lines corresponds to the empty circle on top, alluding to the notion that yin and yang are the function or operation, yang, of emptiness, which in turn is their substance or core. So I forgot to mention there's an outer semicircle, left side, and this is white, the right side is black. There's an inner semicircle, one just below that, and that is black on the left and white on the right. And then another semicircle with white on the left and black on the right, so they're alternating. And then in the very middle, there's an empty circle, and that's what this was just talking about. And then below this, we have 5 characters that are distributed. So there's basically 4 of them in a circle and 1 in the center, with lines that are connecting between these. And they translate this as the 5 agents. And I say this is from an old lecture of mine, so I don't know the source material, which I don't like not knowing, but that's where it is. And they call them the 5 agents. We've called them in the past the 5 phases, and the common name for that is the 5 elements. I personally am, the Wu Xing is what we're talking about. I personally like 5 phases. We just had a podcast on that, so if you want to go back and listen to that. And so this is a further stage in the progressive differentiation from oneness to multiplicity. The signs that connect the agents to each other show the sequence in which they are generated, namely wood, fire, soil. Oh, sorry, I went forward when I didn't mean to do that, and I apologize for that, and I lost my note because of that. And I cannot go back. All right, well, we're going to continue. So we have the 5, and then there's 2 empty circles below, which again kind of talks about other aspects of it, but we were long in time anyways. It's time to move on. So let's move on to the next slide. Here we're talking about the 8 trigrams, and these are, so you have those lines. You have a solid line or a broken line, and if you take either of those, and you make them in combinations of 3 lines. So you can have 3 solid lines, 3 broken lines, or any combination thereof. You can come up with 8 trigrams. And these symbolize complex combinations of yin and yang, and are associated with various aspects and elements of the phenomenal world, resonate due to their same proportions or state of yin and yang. And what we have here as a picture is we have the bagua, is what it's called, which technically means 8 trigrams. And but in this case, they're made in a octagon, and in the middle of this octagon is that Taiji symbol, the sort of the modern Taiji symbol that we know of, which the sort of the 2 fishtails chasing the black and the white, chasing each other with a circle of the opposite color in the middle of it. That's sort of the yin yang symbol that most people are aware of. But again, that's the Taiji symbol, the great ultimate symbol. That's in the center, and then the 8 trigrams are around that. And then we have another diagram here that goes from the bottom up. And what we have is a circle enclosing everything. And this is the Taiji, again, the grand ultimate. And then it goes to yin and yang, which are on the bottom. So there's 2 boxes, a black box and a white box. And in there is actually the symbols for yin and yang. And then it goes into 4 boxes that, there's a black, a white, black, and a white box. And these are called the Sixiang, or the 4 manifestations. And these are the 4 possible combinations of 2 yin-yang lines. So if you have 2 lines, so all the combinations of 2 lines, you can have 2 solids, 2 broken, broken above and solid below, solid above and broken below. Those are the only ways 2 yin-yangs can come together. And those are called the Sixiang, or the 4 manifestations. And then on the final, we have 8 boxes, alternating black and white. And the Sixiang go to the bagua, which are the 8 trigrams. So those are if you take 3 yin-yang lines, they have 8 different combinations. So that's the basis of the Book of Changes. And now we're going to take those trigrams, we're going to take it to the next level, which is we're going to combine those trigrams. So whole trigrams now, and these are now called hexagrams. So trigrams are 3 lines. If we combine 2 trigrams, we get 6 lines, and that's a hexagram. And so there are 64 possible combinations of the 8 trigrams. It encompasses more diversity of phenomena. And then the next line here is changing lines within a hexagram are unstable and change from yin to yang or yang to yin. So when you toss them, when you actually go ahead and toss we're gonna, you can do coins, there's a lot, we're gonna talk about different ways you toss it. But what you can have is you can have a solid line or a broken line when you toss something, but you can also have a solid line that's old and about to change to yin, and you can have a yin line that's old and about to change to yang. So those are called changing lines. So if you take these changing lines within this structure, you have 64, but then you can have times 64 with all the different variations of the changing lines. So with these changing lines, the system is considered adequate to describe all phenomena humans need to understand. So 64 times 64 is a lot of phenomena. What's that? That's about 33,650 different phenomena. So there you go. And they can represent, and here's the interesting part for us, they can represent body parts and be used in medical divination. So that's an interesting thing. You do divination medicine. I don't know many people who do that. I have known 1 or 2. All right, so let's talk about casting the Yi Jing. So that's what's called casting. So you can set the stage. You want a quiet state of mind, quiet location, a little meditation doesn't hurt. And then you formulate the question. You want it simple questions and not convoluted, direct and focused. So don't add a whole bunch of different parts to it. Do not ask a yes or no question. It's more like, I think what I said, what are the aspects of me going to medical school in Australia, or what are the something along those lines, Only ask the question once. And there's many tools that are used for casting. Probably the most common one is 3 coins, and that's what I use. In that case, the tails are worth 2 points, the heads are worth 3 points, and so you can get a result by tossing 3 of them of 6, 7, 8, or 9. And the odd numbers are I always get this wrong. One's yin, one's yang. And then whatever's at the end. So the 6 is changing and the 9 is changing. So that's how that works. And that's the 3 coins. And again, if you want to know more about it, you can look it up on the web pretty easily. You can use dice. I think that's a much more modern way to do it. An older way, and a way that I am not familiar with, though I've always wanted to learn, and I don't know why I haven't put in the energy to do it, is using yarrow stalks or other wooden sticks. And then finally, these days, there are computer programs and online resources. If you put the Yi Jing into the computer, you can hit a button and it'll do a hexagram for you. To me, that takes out a little bit of the meditation and a little bit more of the you in this process, but that certainly is a possibility. And certainly if you want to play around with it, that's a great way to do it. So after you cast, you obtain a hexagram, and then you interpret that hexagram. Yi Jing speaks in symbolic language. Look at the hexagram as a whole, and that gives you a generalized answer to the question. Read the image and the judgment in the text and consider its implications. And then you look at the individual trigrams, some conditions and factors underlying the hexagram. And then you look at the changing lines. Lack of changing lines indicates very specific answer to the question. More changing lines indicate changeable and fluid circumstances. And as we mentioned, there are medical applications of the Yi Jing. It can be consulted for helping with patient care, including diagnosis, prognosis, point selection, understanding transformations of yin and yang, and to help solve difficult cases. So do I use the Yi Jing? Like I said, I don't use the Yi Jing often, only in big questions for myself. So I don't use it, of course, with patient care. I mean, I do know people who do, and they may not rely on it entirely, but they might add a point or two into it. But it's fairly rare that it's used in medical, at least in the U.S. and the Western world, in the developed countries. So, but a very important foundational, one of the oldest books still in existence in China, is super important, foundational for yin and yang and Chinese Taoism and Chinese thinking, very important. And Confucianists will refer to it as well. So very, very important book in Chinese history. And so with that introduction to a very old and revered Chinese book with primarily Taoist underpinnings, let's continue with our herb today. And our herb today is sumac. That's what we're talking about. Here we're calling it S-U-M-A-C. It's also spelled S-U-M-A-C-H. I've also seen it spelled with a K. I've seen it spelled with a Q. So there's a lot of different spellings of this. It is the species Rhus coriaria, and its family is Anacardiaceae. While the root, bark, and berries of a similar plant, Rhus glabra L, are used in North American native medicine, traditionally the berries of our herb are used as a spice and medicine. The leaves and bark of several sumac species can be used as a dye and a tanning agent. It has a lot of tannic acid, which we're going to talk about in it, and that it gives it a lot of its medicinal purposes, but also, as we can see, some of its economic purposes in the way of tanning. If you're not familiar with tanning, that's how you work with leather and stuff like that. So the other names for this, so one of the hindrances that I had is we're really talking about Rhus coriaria as the spice, but there's a lot of similar species that are used around the world, and so sometimes it's a little hard. There were a lot of names for this, but the only ones I could really track to Rhus coriaria were the Hindi words tatrak or tatri, and then sort of the English sort of approach, which is tanner's sumac. So again, referring to its ability to tan things. So let's talk briefly about the family. It comes from the Anacardiaceae family, commonly known as the cashew or sumac family of flowering plants. There are about 83 genera, of which Rhus is the largest, with over 250 species, Rhus is the largest with over 250 species, though there are about 860 species in Anacardiaceae. So a little bit less than a third and a little bit more than a quarter of the species of Anacardiaceae are of the Rhus genera. They bear fruits that are drupes, and drupes are stone fruit with a fleshy outer part surrounding a single pit or stone. So for example, a peach or an apricot would be considered a drupe as well. It includes plants such as mango, cashew, pistachio, and mastic trees. And here's an interesting one. Some plants produce urushiol, an irritant including poison ivy, poison oak, and poison sumac, which is a different species than our herb today. There's a lot of plants that are called sumac, but it's that word before sumac that is really important. So this case, poison sumac, though there's some question mark. Actually, no, it's poison sumac. Some people said it was in Rhus, but I think now it's not considered in the Rhus genera, but I do believe it's in another genera of the Anacardiaceae family. So all those plants, poison ivy, poison oak, poison sumac, are all in this family, though not in our genera of Rhus. So back to sumac. So once the berries are fully ripe, they are harvested, dried, and ground. The processed sumac it takes on a dark red burgundy color and the texture of ground nuts. It has a similar smell and taste to lemon, but is not as sour. Sumac is widely used as an acidulant, so it adds acidity in Arabic and Lebanese cooking, and similar to salt, it brings out the natural flavors of the foods it is cooked with. The flavor of sumac is quite surprising as the deep red spice is reminiscent of fresh lemon juice. This sweet but sour taste is followed by an astringent, powerful punch. So interesting. The history of this herb, the name sumac comes from the Aramaic word sumac, S-U-M-M-A-Q. Again, I don't know how to pronounce Arabic, so I'm just going to say sumac, which means dark red. So again, that dark red nature of this. As far back as 2,000 years ago, sumac was noted for its helpful properties, namely as a diuretic, so that makes you urinate, and anti-flatulent by Roman Emperor Nero's physician Pedanius Dioscorides, or Dioscorides. Again, pronunciation's not one of my top things. I keep trying. Before lemons made their way into Europe, the Romans used sumac to add a tanginess to dishes. According to Serious Eats, if you're not familiar with Serious Eats, they're one of my favorite go-tos for food and recipe information. So, and they popped up when I put in sumac into a search. They say because various species of sumac are native to more than one continent, its exact origins are difficult to establish. Sources claim origins in Sicily, Turkey, and Iran, for example, and that's without acknowledging the separate story of North American species. The fruit was used in both ancient and medieval Europe and around the Mediterranean, not only as a spice, but as a dye and for medicinal purposes. Indigenous peoples in North America also used sumac to treat ailments, as well as to make a refreshing sumac lemonade. Now, I want to make it clear, this is a different species. The species here seem really close. Like they seem to be overlap a lot in their effects, more so than a lot of other sort of things. But the North American is it's called staghorn sumac, and it's a different type of sumac, but it seems very similar to how sumac that we're talking about, the Rhus coriaria, is used as well. So it seems very similar. So North America is used to treat ailments as well as to make a refreshing sumac lemonade. In English, it's known as the lemonade berry, notes author and agroecologist Gary Nabin of some species of the plant. He explains that sumac plants have been growing in North America for thousands of years, and although there are different species from those found in the Mediterranean, their profiles are similar. Today, however, most commercially sold sumac has been imported from the Middle East. Let's talk about some of the traditional uses for this. So sumac is a natural traditional medication found in many world dietary cultures. It is seasoning and flavoring used agent as a main pole in the municipal traditional remedies all over the globe. About 2,000 years ago, the De Materia Medica of Medical Matters, a voluminous Greek physician book by Pedanius Dioscorides, who lived from 40 to 90 CE, had between its folds plentiful, healthy merits of sumac, mainly described as an antiflatulent, stomach tonic, and a diuretic. Rhus coriaria has been used commonly in the remedy of ulcer, anal piles. If you're not familiar with that means hemorrhoids, anal piles, hepatic disease, so liver disease, diarrhea, animal bites, and pain management. Also for treatment of pharynx or throat cold inflammations and seizing hemorrhage like hematemesis, that's vomiting up of blood, hemoptysis, which is spitting up of blood, hemorrhoids, and dysentery, which is a bad particular type of infection of the intestines. It had been prescribed for ocular diseases like conjunctivitis, leukorrhea, and ophthalmia. So those are all basically diseases of the eyes. According to Madura, sumac is a drying and tonifying herb. Its drying nature shows up primarily in its strong diuretic action, while its tonifying effects are apparent once you taste the astringency of the plant, especially the leaf. So really what we're talking about here is the herb is the berries, but we're going to see leaf and bark kind of coming in a little bit here. As a diuretic, sumac leaf moves deep, stagnant water out of the body, reducing edema and water retention. It's helpful for swollen tissues and varicose veins too. When taken as a tea or tincture, the astringent tannins in the leaves can counteract diarrhea, profuse mucus discharge, and other damp flowing tissue states. These could be occurring in the intestines as diarrhea with slimy loose stools, or the lungs as a cough with copious postnasal drip and phlegm in the lungs. Sumac leaf tincture is a good addition to your first aid kit. Again, these are quotes. Topical applications of the leaf can fight fungal skin infections, especially when they have been acquired in a moist location, like a communal shower at the beach or pool. They're also helpful for oral health, tightening up spongy gums and shrinking canker sores. But don't count the berry out yet. As a sour draining herb, and like many berries, sumac berry infusions or tinctures can help with both the outward expressions of diabetes, including fluid stagnation and edema, as well as the underlying causes, which are insulin resistance. So that is from an article I found online by Madura. Here are some more modern uses. This was actually an interesting sort of excerpt, I think, from a scientific paper. Some more modern uses of this. So conventional medicinal practice use Rhus coriaria for cholesterol reduction and in gynecology as an abortifacient. So in other words, it causes abortions. Others also report its use in improving wound healing and as an antimicrobial. Rhus coriaria bark powder is an effective teeth cleaning agent, while its infusion is useful in viral eye infections treatment, while the water bruised is applied on the forehead for the first aid treatment of epistaxis. Epistaxis is a bloody nose. While the water bruised is applied, I don't know exactly what that means. Powdered fruits are sparsed on boiled eggs and eaten for the treatment of diarrhea. Also sounds kind of tasty. A fruits decoction is set and given orally, 150 cc, thrice daily, so 3 times a day, for the treatment of hepatic diseases, urinary system disorders, and diarrhea till improvement occurs. So, a decoction of this, say in 150 cc given orally, that doesn't help me because I don't know what the actual dosages of the herb is in that situation, and that specifically goes into 150 cc. Dosage on this was not the easiest thing to find. We're going to talk about dosage, but it's not in fact, we're going to talk about right now. But it wasn't hard. Like I said, here, specific information about dosing of this herb is difficult to find. It's maybe because it is used most often as a spice, so flavor to taste sort of thing. Healthline, which is a pretty decent scientific, it's not like deeply scientific, it's like science for consumers, but a pretty good website. So that's Healthline, which tends to be quite conservative with herbs, says up to 3 grams per day has been clinically demonstrated to be safe. Holmes, which is The author of the book, I have it right here, The Energetics of Western Herbs, a Materia Medica integrating Western and Chinese herbal therapeutics. So it's kind of that combination of Chinese and Western. And he has some of his own ideas as we go through, but he says dosage in a decoction is 6 to 12 grams for both the root and the berry. So, and he ascribes different functions to both of those parts. So let's talk about Chinese medical actions. It's interesting. So when we start looking at how Chinese medicine may view sumac, things get interesting. There is a Chinese herb, Wu Beidzi, which is translated as Chinese sumac nut gall. Or actually, it's translated as Chinese sumac fruit, but it is the description of it, the sort of the English description of it is Chinese sumac nut gall. Another Chinese term for this is yanfuzi. But there's an issue here. It has this word nut gall in there, and it's one word, Nutgall. And honestly, I did not know what a nut gall was. I mean, I'm familiar with this herb. I mean, I studied it, but I haven't really used it. So interesting. Dharmananda, if you're familiar with Dharmananda, Subhuti Dharmananda, he has written some fantastic articles on all kinds of stuff in Chinese medicine. He's a brilliant person. So he wrote an article, and he says Chinese gall, also referred to as Chinese gall nuts or nut galls, is a plant excretion produced when irritants are released by the larvae of gall insects, such as those of the Cynipidae family, the gall wasps. A similar material is found on Chinese Sumac Rhus species, produced by the activities of a type of aphid. These galls are called Wu Beidzi by Chinese herbalists. So this is an interesting thing. So again, often when you see this, the species that we're talking about is not Rhus coriaria, which is our herb today. It's Rhus chinensis, which basically means Chinese Rhus. So it's a little bit different, but then it's not really that plant. It's these nut galls that will happen on us, or the gall nuts, whatever way, or Chinese gall. So the plant secretes the liquid gall, comprised mainly of tannins that hardens to become the nut. This article is really interesting and focuses on tannins and their medicinal properties. So that's the Dharmananda sort of thing. So basically, Wu Beidzi is not exactly sumac, though it does come from the same, or at least a Chinese species of the plant. And like I said, my feeling, my sense of this is all the different sumac species pretty similar in their functions, because when you list all those things, they sound very similar to what each other say. So I think ballpark of how Chinese would view this to a certain extent. So with this in mind, the gall nut still has a very sour and astringent taste, as does sumac. In other words, there may be some overlap in their functions. And the functions of Wu Beidzi are: it clears toxins, moistens the lungs, clears heat, expels phlegm, and promotes secretion of saliva and stops sweating. Yin Yang House, which is a website that often puts up Chinese medical stuff. I find a lot of Western herbs that are described in Chinese terms on Yin Yang House, which is not always the easiest thing to find. So take it with a grain of salt, but at least it points us in a little bit of a direction. And so Yin Yang House says Wu Beidzi is in the stabilize and bind category of herbs. It is thought to enter the kidney, large intestine, and lung channels, and exhibits cold Han, salty Xian, and sour Swan taste temperature properties, and has the following functions: contains leakage of lung qi, binds the intestines, stops diarrhea, restrains leakage, and absorbs moisture, reduces swellings, and relieves fire toxicity. So some of these we totally get. I mean, if you looked at the ancient things, diarrhea was one of those things that was mentioned. So it sounds like it's in the same ballpark, though maybe not. Some of these are not quite as specific as they might be otherwise. So, okay. To add even more confusion, that book that I just read, the Energetics of Western Herbs, a Materia Medica integrating Western and Oriental herbal medicine traditions by Holmes, does include an entry on sumac root bark with a note about the berry. So first off, the problem with this entry is it discusses Rhus glabra, which is not our Rhus coriaria. The Rhus glabra is that staghorn sumac that is North American species. So this is basically North American sumac as opposed to Middle Eastern or whatever you want to say about Rhus coriaria. So it's not the same species, but again, close. In fact, one of the other articles, and this really kind of really put that other article down in my estimation, says this species is poisonous and says it's actually poison sumac. That is not the case. Glabra is the North American species of sumac, as I mentioned, is also known as staghorn sumac. We're actually going to see the species name for the poison sumac. So that other article had some interesting information, but the fact that it got this so wrong is just really disappointing. So if we overlook this and believe this is one of the sumac family, the monograph says the berry is sour, astringent, dry, and cold in quality, and possesses antipyretic, so it reduces fever, astringent, and vulnerary actions. I love that Holmes uses sort of the old medical technical terms. So vulnerary means healing of wounds. So it helps heal wounds. The decoction and tincture treat hot and weak conditions such as bladder damp heat and intestines damp heat. So there you go. That's sort of a Chinese point of view here. Jump over it. I did just jump over one. Sorry about that. Okay. So the contents of this herb are well researched, and it contains lots of tannins, antioxidants, and other phytochemicals such as flavonoids, terpenoids, and essential oils. We've talked a lot about these flavonoids, terpenoids, and essential oils over the course of our Spurbs Herbs interactions. So according to Al Samri et al. And his team, the overall composition of the dried sumac fruit is mainly composed of moisture, 6 to 11.8%, essential oil content, 1%, protein, 2.3 to 2.6%, fiber, 14.6 to 22.15%, ash, 1.5 to 2.66%, and water-soluble extract of 63.8% and fatty oil of 17.4%. The mineral composition of sumac fruits determined using inductively coupled plasma atomic emission spectrometer. So I've used some spectrometers in the past. I don't have any idea what any of the other stuff means. Showed that potassium, calcium, magnesium, phosphorus, iron, sodium, zinc, manganese, copper, and aluminum are the predominant elements in it. It's worth mentioning that mineral contents were found to be affected by environmental factors in the geographic locations where sumac fruits were collected. That's pretty common, depending on the conditions, the mineral content changes basically. As for vitamin content, sumac fruit contain thiamine, riboflavin, pyridoxine, cyanocobalamin, nicotinamide, biotin, and ascorbic acid. So that's basically vitamin C and several vitamin Bs in there as well. And then tannins comprise a large group of natural products. Oh, this is a different quote. This is going back to that Dharmananda article talking about tannins, because there's a lot of tannins in here. So tannins comprise a large group of natural products widely distributed in the plant kingdom. They have great structural diversity, but are usually divided into two basic groups, the hydrolyzable and the condensed type. So hydrolyzable, so in other words, it can be lysed by water. Hydrolyzable tannins include the commonly occurring gallic acid and the ellagic acid, both of which are in sumac in relatively large numbers. The hydrolyzable tannins react with proteins to produce the typical tanning effect. Medicinally, this is important for treatment of inflamed or ulcerated tissues. They also contribute most of the astringent quality that is noted when drinking tannin-containing beverages. So what are some tannin-containing beverages that you might know of? Tea has a lot of tannins in it. Although both types of tannin have been used to treat diseases in traditional medicine, the hydrolyzable tannins have long been considered official medicinal agents in Europe and North America. They have been included in many pharmacopoeias, in the older editions in particular, and are specifically referred to as tannic acid. These were recommended for treatment of inflammation and ulceration, including topical application for skin diseases and internal use for intestinal ulceration and diarrhea. And we've talked about several traditional uses of this along those lines. All right, so that was the contents. Let's get into the science a little bit here. So many articles discuss the medical properties of sumac. From a scientific point of view, it appears these medicinal uses are not well established. That is not to say there's no evidence for many of them. There just isn't, quote unquote, enough evidence. Al-Samri and his team say these properties include antioxidant, antimicrobial, anti-diabetic, cardioprotective, so it helps the heart, anti-dyslipidemia, so in other words, it helps high cholesterol and triglycerides, anti-nociceptive, so that basically means it's good for pain, neuroprotective, so it protects nerves, dental protection, and anti-cancer effects. So there are some anti-tumor effects to this that have been shown in some of the science. Healthline says sumac is probably best known as a culinary spice. People have used it in traditional herbal medicine practices for centuries. Scientific evidence on the effects of sumac in people is lacking. However, early research suggests it may have potential health benefits. And these include inflammation, including inflammatory illnesses such as heart disease and cancer, managing blood sugar, and relieving muscle pain. Another article, Biological Activities of Extracts from Sumac by Rain and Mazza, agrees with these activities of sumac, including being antimicrobial, antioxidant, and hypoglycemic. So that helps, that lowers sugar. Antioxidant is a big one that is fairly consistent. In fact, there's a whole article about the antioxidant activity of sumac. I think that's still important, but antioxidants were really big about 20 years ago, and they've kind of come down in esteem. And by that, I don't mean they're not useful, but it isn't. I don't think the antioxidant property is the important property. It's what it does with that antioxidant property. So some of the other things that it does. So I'd rather focus on being an antioxidant does not in and of itself say anything about medicinal properties. That's sort of my feeling about it. And so I don't usually get into too much about the antioxidants. It's nice that it's antioxidant. That has been shown to be a general health benefit, but it's not specific to anything in particular. So Abdul Jalil says that sumac has many benefits, including being antimicrobial, antioxidant, hypoglycemic, which we just mentioned, hypolipidemic, again, that's helping the cholesterol and triglycerides. It's also anti-mutagenic and DNA protective. So in other words, that helps prevent cancer. Anti-migratory, and in this case, that was in rats, and it was talking about on vascular smooth muscle. So that was to help the cardioprotective, that helped the heart, as does anti-ischemic, which means it prevents loss of oxygen to certain parts of the parts of the body, and neuroprotective, so it helps those nerves. These are a good list of benefits. However, many are based on animal studies, specific extracts, or in vitro studies. In vitro means in glass. It literally means in glass, so just lab studies, which means strong evidence is not present. The hypoglycemic and hypolipidemic do appear to be based on human studies, but small ones. So, not necessarily the strongest scientific evidence in the world, but it still points in a good direction. So a lot of herbs do not have really strong scientific evidence because there's not a lot of money in showing that it does have these positive effects. In fact, it takes away money often from drugs that may have those effects. So, we always have to take this with a grain of salt. The science isn't there. These are not well established or well proven. But that doesn't mean they're not very effective. It just means we haven't shown that they are. So I did look at drug-herb interactions for this herb. And in doing that, I usually use Google Scholar because it's straightforward and easy for me. I didn't find any results for any drug-herb interactions for sumac, and I usually will if there's issues with an herb. Similarly, the American Herbal Products Association's Botanical Safety Handbook by Gardner and McGuffin puts this herb in interaction class A, herbs for which no clinically relevant interactions are expected. I really like this book. It's a really good book on the safety of herbs. The problem is it was written in 2013. There's a lot more evidence since then, 10 years on. So it may not always be the most up to date at this point, but I like the way they approach these things. They seem to kind of get it. And so when there is an issue, they'll call out a particular herb. And when there isn't an issue, they'll call it out as well. And so it's a good book. So the fact that they give it their highest, they don't expect any interactions here. And again, it's a spice. It's used every day by a billion people on the face of the planet. So I'm not too worried about the safety aspects or the drug herb interaction aspects of this herb. That isn't to say there aren't some concerns. So the biggest concern cited in many articles about this herb is the potential confusion with its dangerous cousin, poison sumac. So we've mentioned that briefly. Further research says this is Toxicodendron vernix, that is the genera and species, not Rhus glabra, as one website has stated, as I mentioned earlier, which was in the past considered part of the Rhus genera, but is no longer part of the Rhus genera. As you can see, it's now the Toxicodendron genera. And here's a quote from Madura. Poison sumac has white berries that droop down, smooth-edged leaves, and smooth bark. Fortunately, poison sumac is also a fairly rare plant, and it only grows in very marshy or watery soils. So look, if you come across something that you think might be sumac, if it has red berries, and as you can see in our picture that we started here, it doesn't droop down; it pretty much stands up for the most part. Then it's probably not poison sumac. And don't touch poison sumac, and certainly don't ingest poison sumac. Not good. Not good at all. So some other concerns. Healthline states a few other potential concerns. Because sumac is related to cashews and mango, people with allergies to those foods may want to steer clear of sumac to avoid any potential allergic reactions. That seems like fairly prudent advice. Because sumac may lower blood sugar, it's also not recommended if you're taking medications that lower blood sugar. So again, I wouldn't, just being on a diabetic medicine, I don't think would prevent you from doing sumac. There are some diabetic medications that lower blood sugar, like insulin does that, and the sulfonylureas, I think, do that, and those can cause sort of a hypoglycemic reaction, and that using a lot of sumac while you're on those kind of drugs, probably not the best idea in the world. But if you're using something like metformin, which is probably the most commonly used, at least for type 2 diabetes, that does not really lower blood sugar. It basically makes your cells more receptive to whatever insulin's around. And so in and of itself, it does not cause hypoglycemia. I don't think there would be any issue with sumac. So it can be a little specific with that and these concerns. And again, this is an expert opinion. There's no evidence to support it, but I think it seems like a wise concern. And going back to Gardner and McGuffin, which is that botanical safety handbook, they put this herb in the safest category, safety class 1, which I think you'd be hard pressed not to, since it's a spice. And most of our spices have to be put in safety class 1. Otherwise, why would we use them every day? There'd be lots of people and lots of problems if they weren't completely safe. So again, a fairly safe herb, as long as you're not mixing up with poison sumac and you don't have any allergies or diabetes. I don't think there could be much concern about this herb in general. So in summary, wow, that was a good one. So we started a discussion today with the discussion. Ooh, I hate when I do that. Why don't I reread these things sometimes? We started a discussion today with a very important historical Chinese book, the Yi Jing, or Book of Changes. From there, we did our deep dive into this interesting culinary and medicinal herb with lots of potential health benefits, but not a lot of substantial research. But who wouldn't want to add some sumac deliciousness into their health routine? Overall, a very interesting herb with some potentially very useful effects. So let's all go out, buy a bottle of sumac or buy some za'atar. If you're not familiar with, I don't even know how to pronounce it. I've only read it. Za'atar. It's like Z-A-T-A-R, I think. And that's a Middle Eastern common spice. It's a mixture of spices, and one of those is sumac. And so then they put it on everything, as my understanding. And so have a bottle of that around and put it on it, and you can have some delicious health as part of your every meal. In our next episode, surprisingly, we will be looking. Why is it surprisingly? In our next episode, we will be looking at a Chinese herb mentioned in today. Oh, that's why it's surprisingly, because we mentioned this herb briefly in today's episode. No, we didn't actually. I meant to, but it's wuweizi or Schisandra fruit, because the reason why I wanted to mention this herb is sumac is often, in one article, they compared it to wuweizi, which is very interesting. It's very sour, just like sumac is, and it's a seed like sumac is to a certain extent. So one source said sumac is very much like wuweizi or Schisandra fruit, and I didn't even mention it today, and I meant to. So there you go. This is a relatively commonly used herb in Chinese medicine in the stabilize and bind category of herbs. So again, a stabilize and bind herb. It is also interesting as it is said to have all 5 tastes in one little package, hence its name, which is translated as 5-flavored seed. And as usual, we will be exploring something a little different. I don't know what it is. I can't tell you yet. I haven't figured it out, but we're gonna. Please join us, and don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss out on even one exciting episode. Thank you very much for joining me today. Really appreciate it. If you like this podcast, please do us a favor. Give us a 5-star rating in your favorite podcast app. We'd be so appreciative. Thank you. And remember, you can get CEUs, continuing education units, and NCCOM PDAs, or National Certification Commission of Acupuncture and Oriental Medicine professional development activities at www.integrativemedicinecouncil.org. That's Integrative Medicine Council, COUNCIL.org. And you can always get in touch with me at Dr. Greg at spurbsherbs.com. That's SPERBSHERBS. Or at our website, www.spurbsherbs.com. Well, again, thank you very much. And here is my bibliography.
Spurbs Herbs.
The proceeding was presented by Dr. Greg Sperber. We would like to thank Janelle for all her support and everybody else who contributed to this program.
Janelle.
Timothy
Nick
Dobbins,
Rogers,
Campbell,